All right, I will jump into the introductions now, and if somebody joins us late, they won't miss too much. So I'm going to switch over the video so that I'm not a ghost face. So my name is Caroline. I'm just here to do a quick introduction. I am the program coordinator of Safe Cycling Thunder Bay, which is based at Eco Superior and funded by the city. Thank you so much for joining us today for our very first Zoom cycling webinar. Super exciting. Looks like we have 9 attendees on right now. So to give you a sense of what we normally do, most of our courses are 4-hour adult training, and we run them with approximately 4 participants. So we do run quite small groups normally so that our participants feel really comfortable. So I see we have a 10th person on. That's fantastic. But it should still be a small enough group that we really hope to answer everybody's questions and meet everybody's needs. If you haven't yet had a chance to grab your bike and you'd like to follow along with us today, this is the perfect time to do that. And then just a note about following along at home with your bike. If you are following along at home and we're going too fast, feel free to let us know in the chat to slow down. We're going to try to work through the material at a speed that will allow everybody to follow along, but obviously we can't see you. So if you do find that we're going too fast, we don't mind slowing down. Just make sure to let us know that. All right, cool. It looks like we are basically ready to delve into things. 2 housekeeping things to cover. First of all, we do have the chat available for a Q&A at any point. So we are going to have a Q&A at the end. But if a question comes up partway through the webinar, feel free to type it into the chat and we'll make sure to get to it at the end. And the other thing that we do as part of our courses is we want to just make sure that we are meeting all of our participants' needs, because obviously you guys have signed up for this course for a reason. There's something that you hope to get out of it. So I just want to give people an opportunity. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of our participants in a second. And if you want to either say what you're hoping to get out of today's workshop, or if you want to type it in the chat, you can go ahead and say that. I'm going to unmute folks now. And then I'll mute folks again in a second, but just takes a second to unmute everybody. All right. So if anybody wants to chip in, it looks like some people have muted themselves, so I can't unmute everybody, but I think I've unmuted everybody I can. So feel free to chip in either through your audio or in the chat to let us know what you're hoping to get out of today.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, this is Joanne. My husband and I, Bob, are watching. We're brand new to biking. We just started this summer. So we read through the course outlines and we're super excited about all that it's going to offer us in terms of being safe and exploring a little bit further than our neighborhood. So that's what we're hoping to get out of it. Stay safe.
That's great. And I do see a couple of similar things in the comments too. So it seems like you're in good company. So I see from Stephanie, bike basics, a little timid to be biking in city streets. Road safety tips from CDAN, and from Patricia, comfort level biking because it has been a while. Want to know how to maintain my bike and know how to fix things while out on the road trail. So that's great. Today's webinar is a great starting point for launching off all of that, because it'll show you how to safety your own bike. And I would also encourage you to check out our upcoming webinars as well, particularly next week, which is Urban Riding Fundamentals. So that seems like it could be a good fit for a lot of people who are here today as well. Does anybody else want to chime in by audio? All right, I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody again. I'm going to switch over the video. I'll switch it over now. I'm going to switch over the video to Rick is on screen, and then Bruce is going to be the sound that you hear. Rick and Bruce both became trained as cycling instructors with Safe Cycling Thunder Bay last year. Rick is happily retired, living in Thunder Bay half the year, working as a volunteer with Eco Superior, teaching our cycling courses, and Rick is a longtime cycling commuter. Bruce loves sharing his enthusiasm to promote bicycling safety. He is an experienced bike mechanic and races with Black Sheep Mountain Bike Club. He can frequently be seen riding Thunder Bay's multi-use trail and mountain biking in Shunya Mines. So I will let you guys go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. Well, welcome everyone. This is Bruce, and I'll be narrating this demo tonight, and Rick will be demonstrating what I talk about. So tonight we're going to go over the ABC Quick Check, which is a fast, comprehensive way to check your bicycle before every ride. We're going to go into some detail about what to look for and how to check things carefully. However, once you learn the ABC Quick Check, you can do it in about a minute. So it's worthwhile doing it before every ride. And that helps give you confidence that your bike is in good mechanical shape and unlikely to have any problems on the road. And as Caroline mentioned, if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and we'll answer them at the end. So ABC Quick Check, each one of those is a certain part of the check, and we're going to start with A. A is for air, which is everything to do with your wheels and your tires. The first thing you want to check is whether your tires are properly inflated. And if you look on the sidewall of your tire, it will list tire pressure. And that's the maximum pressure you can put into your tires. So you want your pressure to be close to the maximum, but not over. If it's too high, you could have a blowout. But if it's too low and you hit a bump hard, you could squash your tire so hard that it gives you a flat tire. So you want your pressure to be near the maximum, but not over. If you have a pressure gauge, it will allow you to check your tire pressure accurately. And if you're not used to checking your tire pressure, we recommend that you get a tire pressure gauge. They're inexpensive, and you can get one at any hardware or automotive store. And then once you get used to what is the right pressure, you probably don't need to use a gauge anymore. You can just tell by kind of squeezing your tire or pushing down on your handlebars or your saddle and seeing how the tires compress. So you can see Rick giving a little demonstration of that now. The second part is to check the valve on your tire, and Rick's pointing to that now. It should point straight out of your rim, and if it's out on an angle, that could cause a problem because it puts stress on the tube where the valve joins the tube, and eventually that could cause a flat tire. So if your valve is not pointing straight out of your rim, what you should do is remove your valve cap, deflate your tire by pressing on the center of the valve stem, and then you can usually wiggle the valve stem just a little bit, and that will straighten it out, and then pump your tire up again. That's not something that will happen very often, but it's worth checking. Next thing you want is to make sure that your wheels are true. And by true, what we mean is when the wheel rotates, there are no side-to-side wobbles and no up-down humps in it. If you do see a side-to-side wobble, that can happen if you hit a bump really hard. It can also happen if you've got a broken spoke. So if your wheel does wobble side to side a little bit when you rotate your wheel, then look for broken spokes. And if it wobbles quite a bit, you should probably get your bike into a bike shop and get them to take a look at it. If you have a spoke wrench, you can adjust the spoke tension yourself, but that's not a common tool that most people would have. So, and the way to eyeball it is you can check your rim as it moves, see how close it is to your brake pads. The next part you want to check is whether there's any looseness in the bearings of your hubs or if they're too tight. So lift up the front of your bike, give the wheel a little spin and see if it spins freely, and then grab the tire and try and wiggle it side to side just a little bit and see if there's any looseness there. If it's too tight or too loose, that could indicate either that your grease in your hub needs to be repacked or that your bearings are a little bit too loose. So again, that's something that requires specialized tools. So if you are getting any side-to-side wiggling in your hubs, you should take that to a bike shop and get them to adjust it. The next thing you want to do is check your tires and take a good look at the side wall, looking for any cracks or bulges in the sidewall. That can happen as tires get old and the rubber starts to dry out a little bit. Also spin your tire around and take a close look at the tread, looking for any worn spots, and also look to see if there's anything embedded in your tread. Maybe on your last ride, you picked up a little piece of glass or a tack or a nail, and it hasn't penetrated the tire far enough yet to give you a flat tire, but it might happen if you're out on a ride. So better to find something like that before you ride than during your ride. And if you find something embedded in your tread, then pull it out. You might be able to do it with your fingers or with a small screwdriver, and then just check to make sure it's not leaking air. The next part we're going to cover is B, which stands for brakes and bars. And this is everything to do with your brakes and the handlebars on your bike. So you want to make sure that your brake cables are tight enough. So squeeze the brake levers and make sure that they're firm and they move easily and they're not bottoming out against the handlebars. Ideally, you'd want to have 2 finger space between your handlebars and your brake levers. And if your brakes are loose, there's something called a barrel adjuster, which is where the brake cable goes into the brake lever, and you can thread that out a little bit to tighten your brakes up. And again, if you're not confident doing that, a tune-up at a bike shop will take care of it. Also, push your brake levers up and down a little bit just to make sure they're snug on your handlebars. And then move down to the actual brakes themselves. And brakes have pads that are bolted to them. These brakes are called rim brakes. So there's a rubber pad that's bolted to the brake. And you want to make sure that that's tight and that the rubber on it's not worn too much. And also that they're touching the rim squarely and they're not too high or too low. And you want to make sure that your brake pads are touching the metal rim, that they're not touching the rubber tire, because if that happens, eventually they'll wear through the sidewall and you'll get a flat. Some people might have disc brakes on their bike. It operates on the same principle with pads squeezing when you pull your brake lever. The difference is that there's a disc around your hub and the pads are locked into one position. So you don't actually have to look to see that the pads are in the right position with disc brakes. And then now you want to check and see if your brakes are functioning properly. So the first thing you want to do is slide your bike forward a little bit and squeeze the left brake lever, which controls the front wheel. And you can see how the front brake has stopped the bike and the back wheel is lifted up a little bit off the ground. So that's a good sign that your brakes are working. And then the next thing is do the same thing except with your right brake lever, which controls the back wheel, move it forward. And you can see how the bike is moving forward, but the back wheel is locked up. Your back brake is functioning as well. The final thing you want to do on your brakes is to take a good look at the brake cables and the brake housings. Make sure they don't look worn or frayed, that they're not sharply bent where they attach to the brakes or the brake levers. And also make sure that when you release your brake levers, they snap back sharply and they're not tight and binding, which can indicate a frayed brake cable or a bent housing or something. That's easy enough to fix. You can do it yourself with the parts, or you can get a bike shop to do it for you. The other half of the B is bars or handlebars. So first thing you want to do is check to see that your headset is tight. So hold on to the front. Well, what Rick's doing is he's holding the wheel with his legs, and then you try and turn the handlebar sideways slightly, and just make sure that they don't feel loose. Now you don't have to really press hard on this, just enough to make sure that they're tight enough that they won't come loose on a ride. The other thing you can do is just grab your handlebars and try and twist them up and down, and just making sure that they're tight in the stem. So if any of those parts are loose, there's Rick had just pointed to the bolts that hold the handlebars to the stem, so you can tighten those up with an Allen wrench. And if your stem is loose in your head tube, you can also tighten that up with a wrench. And the final thing you want to do is make sure that the bearings in your headset are tight. So put on the front brake and wiggle your handlebars back and forth, and you shouldn't feel any clunking or rattling sounds. If it's loose and you feel it rattling, that means your headset bearings are loose. And that's actually a fairly common item to come loose on a bike, just because it takes kind of a pounding as you're riding on the road and hitting bumps and stuff. So your headset bearings is an important thing to check before every ride. The next part we're going to move on to, C, is for chain and crank. And when I say crank, I'm referring to the metal part of the bike that the pedals are attached to. So the first thing you want to look at is take a good look at your chain. Make sure that it's clean looking and it's not dry or rusty. A chain should be lubricated regularly, especially if it's showing any rust or it looks dry, particularly if you are a commuter and you ride in the winter or you ride in the rain. So you can lubricate it with any kind of light oil. You can get generally at a hardware store. Just put 1 drop of oil on each link of the chain. You can go to a bike store and get bike-specific lubricants if you want to get serious about riding, but basically most oils will work. The only thing you want to avoid is a really thin oil, like a penetrating oil, because they don't really have the lubriciousness that your chain needs. So just make sure your chain's not dry and has a little bit of oil on it. Then look at your pedals, make sure that they spin freely, and also kind of grab your pedal and see if you can wiggle it back and forth, indicating that there might be loose bearings. And next thing we're going to look at is your gears, which are called derailleurs. So most bikes are going to have one derailleur on the front that Rick's pointing to, and another one on the back. And the back one's spring loaded, so it adjusts for the different sizes of gears. Just make sure that they seem snug, they're not loose, and also that they seem straight. Sometimes if you fall or put your bike in your car, the derailleurs can get banged and then they get out of alignment and it won't shift very well. And then the final thing to check is look at your bottom bracket and see if it's a little bit loose, so that you can see Rick pointing at the bottom bracket, which is your cranks attached to an axle, which are held in place in the bottom bracket. So it's just that round thing that the axle goes into in the bottom of the bike. And just grab your crank, wiggle it sideways a little bit, and see if there's any play there. And again, it takes a lot of pressure when you're riding, because that's where you pedal. So if there's any looseness there, it is important to get it tightened up. So unless you have specific bike tools, you probably want to get to a bike for that. And now we're going to move on to quick, which stands for the quick release. And most bikes these days have a little cam lock lever that you can easily take the wheels off without any tools. So that's a little lever that moves through 180 degrees. And at one end, it's loose enough to take the wheel out. At the other end, it's snug to hold the wheel in. If you look at the lever that Rick's tightening up, one side of it will say open and the other side will say closed. So you want to make sure that the side that says closed is visible when it's tight. And when you're tightening it, you just want to feel that it's snug, not loose or wobbly, and that it's up close against the fork or the frame, so it's not going to hit or catch on anything while you're riding. Some bikes, especially kids' bikes, won't have quick release levers. They will have bolts, nuts to hold the wheel on. So it's the same principle. You just want to make sure that it's snug enough and the wheel's not loose and moving around. You can adjust, if it's loose, you can adjust those bolts with an adjustable wrench or a socket wrench. And the final part now is the final check. And before you head out on your ride, what you want to do is just lift the bike up a couple of inches off the ground and drop it, and listen for any kind of clunking or rattling that would indicate a loose part. If you have a water bottle, make sure it's tight. If you have lights or a saddlebag, make sure they're tight and attached properly. And then as you ride away, just check your brakes and your gears quickly in the first a minute or two of your ride to make sure that they're functioning properly. And having done all that, that'll take you about a minute before every ride, and it lets you ride confidently knowing that you've given your bike a good check over and looked at all the mechanical components, and it lessens the chance of having any kind of a problem, mechanical problem out on the road. So that's the end of the ABC Quick Check. And if anyone has any questions, you can submit them to Caroline through the chat.
Perfect. We have had one question come in, and I actually have a question as well. So the question that came in is, can I use the same gauge as for my car?
On most bikes, yes, you can. If just look at the valve stem on your bike and the valve stem on your car, and if they look the same, they're about a 1/4 inch diameter, then you can use the same pressure gauge. That's called a Schrader valve. Some bikes, especially racing bikes, might have a different type of valve, which is called a Presta valve. It's thinner and longer. It's used more on European bikes. That you either have to get a special gauge that's designed for use on Presta valves, or you can also get an adapter that threads onto your Presta valve and will allow you to use a Schrader gauge and a Schrader pump to check your pressure and pump up your tires. And that adapter is available. Most bike shops will have them. A lot of them will give them away free if you ask nicely. Some pumps actually come with a Presta adapter. So yes, most bikes, you can use a standard pressure gauge.
Perfect. I just want to encourage people to keep using the chat. If there's any bike parts that you want, maybe you were looking away when we pointed to which part that was, or, anything else you would like to know, we're totally happy to answer that. And I'm just wondering, Bruce and Rick, sorry to put you on the spot, but you know, we claim in the introduction that we can do this in 1 minute, and I'm wondering if Rick is able to demo what that looks like.
I just started my stopwatch. That was about 45 seconds. Now, Rick's an
Awesome.
expert. What we recommend that you go a little slower at home the first couple of times you try.
Great, thank you. I don't see any additional questions in the chat right now. So we might end up wrapping up early. Do you think that you could also just show folks on those quick release levers what the closed versus open looks like? Cool. All right, we have a question about the use of a bell. So if you can speak a little bit to the use of a bell or a horn, that would be great.
I guess I see two aspects to this. One is if you're out on a multi-use trail that's likely to have, you know, families and people walking their pets and dogs. And the other one is on more of an off-road trail that's mostly used for bicycling. And I actually find it's a bit of a delicate situation to try and find what's the most effective, because if you get too close to someone and you ring your bell, you can frighten them. So I'll tend to ring my bell when I'm, you know, far enough away that they'll hear the bell but not be jarred or frightened by it. And then when I get up a little bit closer, I might say, I'm going to pass you on your left, or just I'll say passing. So I take that kind of two-phase approach of a bell when you're further away, and then softly speaking that you're going to pass them as you get a little bit closer. On trails, pretty much the same thing. Now, a lot of people who are out riding on mountain bike trails are specifically there to ride. And they'll probably hear you coming. So I find a bell isn't quite as necessary on off-road riding, but it's still worthwhile to have one. I have come across maybe riders coming the other direction that aren't really paying attention, and you can ring your bell to get their attention while they're riding. One other thing I wanted to mention about the quick releases is they are adjustable. So on one side of the bike, there is the quick release lever. And then on the other side of the bike, there's an adjustable nut. So if you find your quick release is too loose or too tight, you can turn the nut on the other side. Usually the nut is on the right side of the bike and the quick release lever is on the left side. So that's just a threaded nut you can tighten or loosen. And you want it to be so that when you're closing your quick release lever, it starts to tighten up about halfway and feels snug when it's closed, but it shouldn't require a lot of pressure to close.
Cool. We've had a couple more questions come in. It looks like folks have really started jogging their brains with questions, so that's great. Our next question is, how do I adjust, the question is front brakes if one pad rubs? And I don't know if it would be helpful if you I don't know, you might need to come closer for us to get a good view of that, but how do I adjust front brakes if one pad rubs?
So the first thing to check is that your wheel is centered within your fork, because if you got a little bit sloppy when you put your fork, put your wheel into your fork, it might be just off-centered. So if that's the case, you'll see that it's closer to one side of the fork blades than the other. If that's the case, just loosen your quick release and make sure the wheel is set all the way into the fork dropout so that it's centered. And then most brakes will have a method to adjust the tension. And so inside the brakes, and it depends on the type of bike, whether it's a mountain bike or a road bike, but usually on one side of the brakes, there's a little screw that can be adjusted either with a small Phillips screwdriver or with an Allen wrench. And if you tighten it up on the side that's closer to the rim, it will push that side away from the rim and pull the other side closer to the rim. So generally that's the key is a little screw sticking out that you use a small screwdriver on to tighten up the side that's closest to the rim.
Perfect. Next question. This is a tricky one. Can you, at least I don't know the answer, can you recommend a source for a good mirror?
For a good mirror, yeah, I got that one at Fresh Air Experience. And I don't remember what brand it was.
Mary Mirror, something like that.
Okay, and then there are also different types of mirrors. That's a handlebar one, which yeah, it just goes in the end of your handlebars. I find they're good because it's always on the bike and you don't have to remember to bring it with you. One drawback with this, if you lay your bike down, it tends to move the mirror out of alignment. I find it's really helpful for using in traffic. There are other ones that you can attach to your helmet or attach to your glasses as well. But I think, you know, go look around in a bike store and see if they have one that looks like the type you want.
Awesome. And here's a really good question. What tools would you recommend to carry with me for repairs and adjustments? So I'm guessing that this means like bring with me on my ride.
Sure. So most bike parts use metric nuts and bolts. So, and the typical ones you'll want are Allen keys, a 4mm, an Allen key is like a hex wrench that fits into a hex-shaped hole on the bolt. So a 4mm, 5mm, and 6mm Allen wrench. And then for actual hex bolts, you want 8mm, 9mm, and 10mm wrenches. And you can get bike-specific wrenches called a tri-wrench that has each of those 3 different sizes of Allen wrenches and hex bolts. The other thing you want to carry with you is tire levers and a patch kit. Most bike stores will sell a little kit that comes in a plastic container that has patches and some liquid to help the patch stick, and then 2 tire levers to help get your tire off the bike. There's lots of videos on YouTube that will show some basic bicycle maintenance. Anything else I've forgotten, Rick? Yeah, small Phillips and flat screwdriver, and that pretty much covers it. Yeah, if you ride a lot, you definitely want to carry a pump with you, and a spare tube is much easier out on the road than trying to put a patch on your tube. So if you get 1 flat, you can just swap in your spare tube. If you get 2 flats, that's when you have to do the patch your tube. And then a couple of other points of note on flat tires. Carry a Thunder Bay bus pass with you if you're riding in the city, because most buses have bike racks on the front. So if you do get a flat tire, you can use the bus pass to take your bike closer to home that way. And also, if anyone has CAA, Canadian Automobile Association membership, they have something called Bike Assist, where if you call them, they will come and they won't repair your bike, but they will take you and your bike anywhere within the mileage allowance of your CAA membership.
Do you happen to have tire levers in that handy bike under your seat there, so you could show folks what
yes.
they look like?
Yeah, they should be in there.
And
So
maybe if you have a patch kit too, I don't know.
So I think there will be a patch kit in there, yeah.
Oh, a little bit lower, there we go.
So if you open that up, inside there, you'll typically find some patches, a little bit of sandpaper to scratch up the tube before you put the patch on, and then that little tube of stuff that Rick held up. It's a patching sort of a glue that you put on your tube first, let it set for a while, and then push the patch onto the tube. And as the glue sets, the patch gets vulcanized onto the tube, and that'll really never come off. Right there, Rick's holding up what I call a tri-wrench. So that's your small hex wrenches that you can use for most of the bolts on the bike. Those are tire levers. So you'll see one end of them that Rick's pointing to. It's kind of got a small curve on it. So you let all the air out of your tire. You hook that under the bead of the tire against the rim. And then you can see the other end of it has a little hook that you can hook onto your spokes. So tires can be hard to pull off. So you let all the air out of it. You hook the curved end under the bead of your tire and pull it down, and then you hook the little hook on one of your spokes. So that will hold the tire partway off, and then usually you can put in the second tire lever and just twist it around and pull the tire off. And again, there's tons of videos on YouTube that really demonstrate all this stuff. Oh, and there's Rick's holding up a spare tube. And I think there's probably a chain tool in there. So that's generally what I carry with me on a ride, maybe a little bit of money.
That's great. Thank you for demoing that. I'll just give folks another minute or two for any questions in the chat. But that's great. That's been some good information. Yeah,
another good thing that Rick mentioned is when you're riding, bring your cell phone, bring your health card and an ID card. You hope, driver's license, you hope to never have to use those things while you're on the road, but better to have them than not have them.
All right, it looks like we're all out of questions and all wrapped up. So if anything additional comes up, folks can feel free to email me or respond to the event. And I'm happy to just maybe send a thank you email, and maybe I will we do have a kind of cheat sheet for ABC Quick Check. So I can email that out to all of the participants as a follow-up. Hopefully that's something that will be helpful. And then if anybody has any additional questions, do feel free to get in touch. And we are happy to respond by email too if you think of something that maybe didn't come to mind here today. So thank you very much to Bruce and Rick, and thank you for, we were at 14 participants total, so that it's great. It's great to be able to reach this many people through Zoom, and hope to see some of you folks at a future webinar on Tuesday night. All right, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.